The first time Princess Maelin spoke to me, she did not raise her voice, and that is the part I have never been able to forget. Loud children I could have dismissed. A tantrum at the foot of the west stair would have meant nothing to a man trained to stand through weather and insult alike. But she came to me quietly, in the gray hour before the household woke, and she asked her question the way a person asks who has already been told no by everyone else, and has decided to try one last door before giving up entirely. "Do you have to believe what they tell you?" she said, "or are you allowed to believe what you see?" I was on the second post of the North Gallery, which in the House of Harrowgate is the long stone corridor that runs between the children's wing and the state rooms, hung with the portraits of dead kings, and lit at that hour only by the tall windows that look east over the frost garden. My orders were to stand. My orders were always to stand. A guard of the king's household does not answer riddles from children who have crept out of bed in their nightclothes, and if he is wise, he does not so much as let his eyes drop to acknowledge them, because a man who bends once bends again, and the whole point of us, the reason we are dressed the way we are dressed and drilled the way we are drilled, is that we do not bend. I looked straight ahead at the far end of the gallery, and I said nothing. She did not go away. That was the second thing. A child playing at defiance would have huffed and stamped off to find a more interesting adult. Maelin stood beside me with her small bare feet on the cold stone, and she waited, and when a full minute had passed she said it again. Not louder, just slower, as though she had decided I was simple and needed the words spaced out. "Are you allowed," she said, "to believe what you see?" I was 9 years in the Guard by then. I had stood through a coronation and 2 funerals and one attempt by a drunk lord's son to knock the bearskin off my head with a riding crop, and I had not moved for any of them. I want to be honest about the man I was that morning, because the story does not make sense otherwise. I did not want to answer her. I wanted her to go back to bed so that I could go back to being a statue, which is a comfortable thing to be. A statue is not responsible for anything. A statue does not have to decide. But there was something in the flat, tired way she asked it, no drama, no tears. A child stating a problem she had already turned over 100 times alone, that got in under the discipline, the way a cold draft gets in under a door. So I broke my orders for the first time in 9 years, and I dropped my eyes and I looked at her. She was small even for 9. She had the king's coloring, the dark hair and the pale gray eyes of the House of Harrowgate, and she was wearing a nightgown too thin for the season with a woolen shawl clutched round her shoulders that she must have taken from someone else's room, because it was far too big, and it dragged on the floor behind her like the train of a gown 3 sizes too grand. She was not crying. I have thought about that many times since. She had every reason to cry, and she was not crying. She had come to me the way you come to a locksmith or a physician, because she needed something done, and she had heard somewhere that guards were people who did things. "You are Princess Maelin," I said. "I know who I am," she said. "I asked you a question." "Guards," I told her, "are allowed to believe what they see. It is most of what we do. We watch and we remember and we report what is true." Something in her face changed then. It was not relief, exactly. It was more like the look of a person who has been carrying a weight in both arms for a long way and has just seen a table she might be allowed to set it down on. "Then I need you to watch something," she said. "And I need you to remember it, because when I tell them they say I dreamed it or I'm being dramatic or I don't understand grown-up things. But I'm not dreaming it, and I do understand it. I just can't make anyone else look." "Make me look at what?" She glanced down the gallery, toward the children's wing, and she lowered her voice even further, which I would not have thought possible. "The man who comes at night," she said, "to the nursery corridor. He isn't a doctor and he isn't a footman and he doesn't belong there, and he counts us. He stands in the dark by the little ones' doors and he counts us, and then he writes it down and then he goes away. And nobody believes me because nobody else has seen him, because he only comes when the corridor guard has been sent away." I should tell you, before I go further, what the House of Harrowgate was in those days, because you cannot understand what her few sentences did to the back of my neck unless you understand the house. King Alaric was old by then and grieving still, though the grief was years behind him. His first wife, Queen Isolde, the mother of the crown prince and of Princess Alara, had died when the children were small, and the king in his loneliness had married again, a clever, beautiful, ambitious woman named Morwenna, who was now Queen Consort, and who had brought into the household her own grown son, Lord Cassius, and her own grown daughter, Lady Verena. The old house and the new, the king's blood and the Queen Consort's blood, sharing a roof, sharing a table, and everyone at court understood this even if no one said it, not sharing an inch of trust. Maelin was the king's granddaughter, the daughter of Princess Alara. She and her brothers, Torin, who was 11, and Bram, who was only 6, lived in the children's wing at the far end of the North Gallery, in the rooms that had been the nursery of the house for 200 years. And the man who comes at night, in a house like that, counting the king's blood in the dark and writing it down, that was not a story I could hear and go on being a statue about. "When does he come?" I said. "Late," she said, "after the second bell. Never the same night twice, so you can't sit and wait for him easy, and only when the corridor is empty. There's supposed to be a guard at the nursery door all night, the whole night, that's the rule, but 3 nights out of the 7 the guard gets a message that he's wanted somewhere else and he goes, and while he's gone the man comes." She looked up at me. "You're a guard. You could not go when the message comes. You could stay." "Who sends the messages?" "I don't know. They come folded up. I've seen the guard read them and sigh and go. I tried to grab one out of the bin once and it just said he was wanted at the South Post, and when I told Nanny Cora, she said the guard had every right to answer his captain and I was a nosy girl who should be asleep." Her jaw set. It was a very small jaw and it set like a much older person's. "Everyone has a reason why the thing I saw isn't the thing I saw. Nanny Cora says I dreamed the man. My tutor says I read too many frightening books. My grandmother, the Queen Consort." And here, for the first time, the flat tiredness cracked, and I heard something underneath it that I did not like at all. "My grandmother, the Queen Consort, says that if I keep telling stories about strangers in the corridor, they will have to move me somewhere quieter for my nerves. Somewhere I can rest, away from my brothers." And there it was. There was the thing that made me set my jaw the way hers was set. Because I knew, the way you know a false note in music before you can name it, that a 9-year-old does not invent the phrase "somewhere quieter for my nerves." That is not a child's phrase. That is a phrase that has been said over a child by an adult in a certain tone, and the child has heard it and understood the shape of the threat inside it, even if she could not have told you what the threat was. "Away from my brothers. Somewhere quieter. For your nerves." I had been a soldier and then a guardsman for the better part of my life, and I had learned to recognize the particular music of a lie that is being arranged in advance. The way a person builds, brick by brick, the story they will tell later about why a thing that has not happened yet was really nobody's fault. This girl is nervous. This girl imagines things. This girl needed to be moved somewhere quiet, poor thing, for her own good. Do you see? The story was being written before the event, and the event, whatever it was, had something to do with the man who came in the dark and counted the king's grandchildren. I did not tell her any of that. You do not hand a 9-year-old the full weight of a thing like that. It is not hers to carry, and I had already decided in the space of that gray minute that it was mine. But I did the one thing she had crossed a cold stone gallery in someone else's shawl to get, the one thing that not a single adult in her small, careful life had given her. "I believe you," I said. She blinked. I do not think she had planned for that. I think she had planned for another reasonable adult explaining to her why she was wrong, and she had steeled herself for it. And now the thing she had braced against was not there, and it left her, for a moment, without anything to say. "You do," she said finally. "You told me a man comes only when the guard is gone, and only when the guard has been sent a message he can't refuse, and never on the same night twice. That is not how a dream behaves. A dream is stupid and repeats itself. What you've described is careful. It has a plan behind it. Children don't invent plans that careful and then complain that no one believes them. They'd rather be believed, so they'd make it simpler. The fact that your story is inconvenient and hard to prove is the very thing that tells me it's true. I looked down at her small, serious face. So yes, I believe you. And now I need you to do exactly what I say, and it is going to be the hardest thing, because what I'm going to ask you to do is go back to bed and behave as though you have given up. Given up, she repeated, as though the words tasted foul. You've been loud, I said. You've told your nanny and your tutor and your grandmother, and every time you tell them, you also tell him the man that you are watching. Whoever sends those messages knows the little princess keeps making a fuss. So starting tonight, you stop. You stop telling anyone. You look tired and sad, and you say maybe you did dream it after all, and you let them think you have decided to be a good, quiet girl, and you leave the watching to me. I paused, because this next part mattered and I wanted her to hear it as a promise and not a dismissal. I am not sending you away, Maelin. I am taking it off you. There's a difference, and you're clever enough to know it. You carried this by yourself as far as you could, and then you found the one door that would open. That was not the act of a nervous girl. That was the act of a soldier. Now let a soldier take the watch. She looked at me for a long moment with those pale gray eyes that were so much older than the rest of her. And then she did something I have never told anyone, because it is the kind of thing that sounds sentimental in the retelling and was not sentimental at all in the moment. She reached up and she straightened the buckle of my crossbelt. It was not crooked. She just wanted, I think, to touch the uniform, to make the alliance real with her hands the way you'd shake on a bargain. And she said, "What's your name? A soldier ought to have a name." "Halloway," I said. "Wrenn Halloway." "Halloway," she said, trying the weight of it. "All right, Halloway, I'll go back to bed. I'll pretend I gave up." She pulled the enormous shawl tighter and turned to go, and then she stopped and looked back over her shoulder, and for one instant she was only a small, cold child again and not a soldier at all. "You won't leave," she said. It was not quite a question. "When the message comes, when they try to send you away, you said you wouldn't, but everyone says things." "I have stood on this stone for 9 years," I told her, "through a king's crowning and a queen's burying, and I have not moved for a lord's whip or a drunk man's dare or a storm that took the tiles off the East Range. I do not leave a post, princess. It is the only thing I am truly good at. When the message comes, I will still be here." She nodded once, satisfied in the grave way of a person concluding real business, and she padded off down the long dark gallery toward the children's wing, dragging her borrowed shawl behind her. And I stood and I watched her all the way to the nursery door to be certain she reached it, which was itself a small breaking of orders, because a guard on the north gallery post keeps his eyes level and does not track a child down a corridor. But I had already broken the first order that morning, the one about not looking at all, and I have found that the first broken order is the fence. Once you are over it, the rest of the field is simply open, and you go where you have decided to go. That was how it started. A barefoot girl in a shawl 3 sizes too big, asking a stone whether it was allowed to believe its own eyes. Everything that came after, the message that came 4 nights later, the thing I found folded inside a physician's ledger, the confrontation in the Queen Consort's antechamber, the king rising from his chair with a face I had never seen on him in 9 years of standing behind it. All of it grew from that gray minute in the gallery, from the single decision to answer a child instead of ignoring her. I have turned it over 10,000 times since, and I always come back to the same place. The whole house believed she was dreaming. She was not dreaming, and the difference between those two facts was one man agreeing to look. Let me tell you then what he saw. The first thing I did, when my watch ended that morning and the house began to wake, was nothing at all, which is the hardest thing for a man who has just decided to act. I did not go to my captain. I did not go to the steward, a guardsman who goes running to his superior with a story about a phantom in the nursery that only a child has seen does not save the child. He ends his own usefulness. He is thanked and reassigned and quietly noted as a man whose nerves may be going, and the corridor is left to whoever was arranging the corridor in the first place. If Maelin had already learned at 9 that the surest way to be disbelieved is to be loud, then I could learn it too. I would be quiet. I would be a stone that watches. But I would watch properly, and to watch properly I needed to understand two things I did not yet understand. Who sent the messages that emptied the nursery corridor, and what a man could possibly be counting the king's grandchildren for. So over the next days I did the patient, unglamorous work that is the true trade of a guardsman, and that no one ever puts in the songs. I traded shifts. A man named Osric owed me a favor from a winter when I had covered his post while his wife was ill, and I called it in, and I got myself moved from the North Gallery day watch to the nursery corridor night watch. The very post that, 3 nights out of 7, was being conveniently emptied. It cost me nothing but sleep and a lie to the roster sergeant about wanting the quieter hours. He was glad to give the night post away. Most men are. The night post is long and cold and boring, and no one wants it, which is precisely, I began to understand, why it had been chosen. The nursery corridor of the House of Harrowgate is a short, thick-walled passage, older than the rest of the wing, with the 3 children's doors along one side, Bram's nearest the guard's alcove, then Torrens, then Maelin's at the far end nearest the little turret stair, and on the other side a row of deep windows, and between them, a single locked door that led down to what had once been a physician's still-room in the days when the house kept its own apothecary. That door mattered later. I did not know it yet. On my first night at the post I knew only the geography, and the cold, and the particular silence of a place where children are asleep, which is not like any other silence, because it has a warmth in it. A sense of small breathing lives behind the doors, that makes a man stand straighter without being told to. Maelin kept her word. That was the thing that first made me certain, beyond the reasoning, that she had told me the truth. A child who had invented the phantom to get attention could not have borne to go quiet. The whole point of an invented terror is to be soothed over it, again and again. But Maelin, from the morning of our bargain, went silent as a closed book. Nanny Cora told the undernurse, where I could hear, that the little princess seemed to have got over her nonsense at last, thank goodness, and had been ever so good and calm these past days, and wasn't it a mercy? I stood my post and let them believe it. Only once on the second night did Maelin's door open a crack, and one pale gray eye look out at me across the dark corridor to confirm that the soldier was really there, really standing, really not gone. And I gave her the smallest nod a man can give, and the door closed, and I heard, very faint, the sound of a child letting out a breath she had been holding for a long time. Then she slept. She slept, I think, for the first time in weeks, because for the first time in weeks the watch was not hers. 3 nights passed, and no message came, and no man came, and I began, I will admit it, to wonder whether I had let a lonely, clever, frightened girl talk me over the fence for nothing. On the 4th night the message came. Came the way she had said it would. A little after the 2nd bell, when the house was as dead as it gets, a page I did not know, a soft-footed boy in the Queen Consort's household livery, not the king's, came up the turret stair with a folded paper and held it out to me and said, in the flat recited way of a boy repeating what he has been told, that Captain Denholm wanted the nursery guard at the south post at once. There was a matter. I was to come directly. I took the paper. I unfolded it. It said exactly what the boy had said, in a clean clerk's hand, sealed with a plain wax seal and not the captain's own, a thing I noticed, and the emptied guards before me, night after night, apparently had not, because a tired man at the end of a long cold watch reads the words and not the seal. I was wanted at the south post. My captain, it seemed, had need of me on the far side of the house immediately. And here was the whole hinge of the thing, the exact place where every guard before me had turned and gone, and left 3 sleeping children to the dark. Because the order was real or looked real and a guardsman obeys his captain, that is not a small thing to set aside. It is the spine of everything we are, and if I stayed and it turned out Denholm truly had summoned me, I would be a man who had abandoned an order on the strength of a 9-year-old story, and that would be the end of me. Every incentive the house could arrange had been arranged to make a good soldier leave that corridor. Obey your captain. Do not be the fool who trusts a child. Go. I looked at the boy. I looked at the seal that was not my captain's seal, and I thought of a small girl straightening my crossbelt to make the bargain real, saying you won't leave, everyone says things. Tell the captain, I said, that the nursery guard cannot leave the nursery. That is the standing order of this post. A king's grandchild sleeps behind each of these doors, and this post is never left empty by anyone for any summons without a relieving guard sent to stand in his place first. If the captain wants me at the south post, he will send a man to take my watch, and then I will go. Until a relief stands where I stand, I do not move. Tell him those are the king's own household rules, and he taught them to me himself. Which was true, every word of it was true. It is the standing order of any guarded nursery in any well-run house, and it had simply, quietly, been allowed to lapse in the house of Harrowgate over some slow season, the way good rules lapse when a tired man wants his bed and no one is watching. The messages had worked for months precisely, because they exploited the gap between the rule as written and the rule as kept. I had done nothing but insist on the rule as written. The page boy's face did something complicated. He had not been told what to do if the guard refused, because the guard had never refused, and he stammered that he would tell the captain, and he went back down the turret stair much faster than he had come up, and I stood alone in the cold corridor and waited to see what would come up those stairs next. What came up the stairs was not a relieving guard. Of course it was not. If the summons had been real, a relief would have come. A captain who truly needs a man at the south post at midnight simply sends someone to take the post. That is how it is done, and the whole matter is settled in 5 minutes. No relief came. Instead, the corridor stayed empty for a long half-hour, and then I heard, very soft, the click of the far door, not a child's door, but the locked still-room door across the passage. The old apothecary door that I had assumed was sealed and forgotten, and it opened, and a man stepped out into the corridor with a shielded candle in one hand and a slim leather ledger under his arm, and he did not see me, because he was not looking for me, because for months there had never been anyone here to see. He was a lean, gray, ordinary-looking man in the sober dark coat of a household physician, the kind of man you would pass in any corridor of any great house and never mark, and that ordinariness was the most frightening thing about him. He came out of the still-room door with the ease of a man who has done a thing so many times it has stopped feeling like a crime, and he turned toward the children's doors, and he lifted his candle, and he began, exactly as a 9-year-old girl had told a stone gallery he would, to count. He went to Bram's door first, the little one's nearest me, and he stood before it with his head tilted, listening, and he made a small mark in his ledger. Then to Torrens. Another mark. He was moving down the row toward Maelin's door at the far end, and I understood, in a single cold rush, that whatever this was, it was not watching for the children's safety. A man who guards children does not do it in secret from behind a locked apothecary door in the dead of night after arranging for the real guard to be sent away. He was cataloguing them. He was noting which of them slept where, and how deeply, and which door was nearest the turret stair, and I did not know yet for what, but I knew it was for nothing good, and I knew that the girl at the end of the corridor was not dreaming, had never once been dreaming, and had been telling the truth to a house full of people who found it more comfortable to move her somewhere quiet than to believe her. I let him reach Torrens' door. I wanted him well into the corridor, past the still room, with his candle up and his ledger open, and his crime as plain as a crime can be, before I spoke. Then I stepped out of the guard's alcove where the shadow had hidden me, and my boot came down on the old stone with the flat hard sound that boots make in a silent house, and the man froze the way only a guilty man freezes, not startled but caught, which is a different thing, and I have seen both, and I know the difference. "Good evening," I said. "The nursery guard cannot leave the nursery. Did no one tell you? It's the standing order of this post." I let him look at me a moment, at the uniform, at the fact that I had not gone. "So it seems you and I are going to have a conversation about what a physician of this house is doing, counting sleeping children out of a locked room in the dark. And you are going to have it with me now, quietly, or you are going to have it with the king in the morning, loudly. Choose." The man was clever enough not to run. Running, in a walled corridor with only a locked door and a turret stair for exits and an armed guardsman between him and both, is the act of a frightened amateur, and he was not an amateur. He straightened, and he closed the ledger with a small soft snap, and he did the thing that clever guilty men always do first, which is to reach for the story that makes it all ordinary. "You've misunderstood, Guardsman," he said. His voice was smooth and reasonable and pitched low, the voice of a man used to soothing patients. "I am Master Fenwick, physician to the Queen Consort's household. The children have been unwell, a low fever going round the wing, and I've been asked to look in on them at night to check their rest, without waking them and frightening them. It is a kindness. It is done quietly, precisely so as not to alarm the little ones. Now I'm sure your standing order is very fine, but you're new to this post, and you're seeing shadows where there's only a physician doing his duty. Stand aside and let me finish my rounds, and we'll say no more about your enthusiasm." It was a good story. I want to be fair to the man. It was a good story, delivered well, and if I had been the tired guard he had counted on, the one who reads the words and not the seal, I might have flushed and stammered an apology and stood aside, and Master Fenwick would have finished counting the children and vanished back through his locked door, and the little princess who had told the truth would have been proven, one more time, to be a girl who imagined things. Everything in the house was arranged so that a reasonable man would believe the smooth gray physician over the frightened child. That is how these things always work. The lie wears the respectable coat. But I had spent 9 years learning to hold still against pressure, and a smooth story is only another kind of pressure. So I held still. "You looked in on the children," I said slowly, "without waking them, out of kindness. Then why did you not come by the corridor door, like a physician who has been asked to look in on sick children and greet the guard and go from door to door with a lamp in the ordinary way? Why did you come out of the old apothecary's still-room, which has been locked and dark for years, with a shielded candle, at midnight, on the one night in 4 when the corridor guard is sent away by a message sealed with a wax that is not his captain's? A kindness does not need a locked room and a false summons, Master Fenwick. A kindness knocks at the front. What comes up through the still room in the dark is something else, and both of us know its name, even if only one of us will say it." His face did not change much. That was the mark of the professional. But something behind his eyes went very still, the way water goes still when the current under it is stopped, and I knew he had understood that the tired guard was not on the post tonight. I pressed the advantage while I had it. That is a thing you learn, that the moment a liar realizes his story has failed is the one moment you can get truth out of him, before he builds the next one. "That ledger," I said. "Give it to me. This is my private record of the children's health, and you have no. Give it to me, or I raise the house right now, and we open it in front of the king's own steward, and you can explain the false summons to my captain in the morning as I promised." I took one step, and it was only one step, but a guardsman's step in a silent corridor is a loud thing, and he was a physician and not a soldier, and the arithmetic of the moment was plain to both of us. He weighed it. And then, because he was clever, he made the clever man's mistake, which is to believe he can still talk his way clear of a smaller admission if he surrenders the smaller thing. He handed me the ledger. I did not open it there. A wiser instinct told me not to read it by his candle, in his presence, where he could watch my face learn what was in it, and could shape his next lie to fit. I tucked it under my own arm and I said, "You'll go back the way you came, through your still room door, and you'll lock it, and you'll understand that as of this moment that door is watched, and this corridor is watched, and the standing order of this post is back in force. A king's grandchild sleeps behind each of these doors, and no man crosses this floor at night again while I hold it. If your errand here was truly innocent, you have lost nothing but a night's rounds you could have done by daylight. If it was not, I let that hang. Then you have a very short time to decide whether you would rather be the man who confesses to the king, or the man the king's guard confesses him to. I have found the second kind of man is treated much more harshly. Good night, Master Fenwick." He went. He went back through the still room door without another word, and I heard the lock turn, and I stood alone in the corridor with a physician's ledger under my arm and my heart going harder than it had gone in years, and I waited out the rest of that watch without opening it, because I wanted witnesses when I did, and daylight, and a clear head. But I will tell you that I did not sit down once that whole long night. I stood in front of the children's doors, all three of them, moving slow from Bram's to Torrens to Maelin's and back, the way a proper nursery guard stands, and somewhere near the fourth bell Maelin's door opened its crack again, and the pale gray eye looked out, and this time it went not to me but past me, down the corridor, searching the dark for the man who came at night. And finding only me, only the soldier standing where the soldier had said he would stand, the eye came back to my face with a question in it. "Was he here? Did you see him?" I nodded once. "Yes, I saw him, you were right. I have been thanked in my life by kings and by captains, and once on a battlefield, by a man whose life I dragged out of a river, and I tell you that none of it ever landed the way that child's face landed when she understood, across a dark corridor without a word spoken, that a grown person had finally seen the thing she had been trying to make them see. She did not smile. It was too large a thing for smiling. She just looked at me for a long moment, and then she closed her door, and I heard the small sound again of a child sleeping who does not, tonight, have to keep watch. And I thought, whatever is in this ledger, whatever this costs me, that was worth it. That one look was worth the whole of it, and I had not even yet begun to pay. I read the ledger at dawn, in the roster sergeant's empty office, with gray light coming through the one high window, and what I found in it changed the shape of the thing entirely. Took it from a frightened girl and a creeping man, and turned it into something with a reach and a purpose that made my hands cold on the pages. It was not a record of the children's health. There was not one word in it about fever, or rest, or medicine, and Master Fenwick had been a fool to call it that, because it would not have survived a moment's real reading. It was a survey. Page after page in that clean clerk's hand, dated night by night over the better part of 2 months, which child slept in which room and how deeply, and how quickly each fell asleep after the nursery was quiet, and which doors could be opened without waking the sleeper and which could not. And this was the part that stopped my breath, the exact times, on the nights the corridor guard had been summoned away, that the passage stood empty, from the guard's departure to the changing of the outer watch. A window. He was mapping a window. He had spent 2 months, patient as a surveyor, establishing exactly how long the nursery corridor could be left unguarded and unobserved, and which of the 3 children was the deepest sleeper, and which room was nearest the turret stair that ran down, past the still room, to a small forgotten door that led out onto the frost garden and the old carriage lane beyond. The deepest sleeper, by his own careful notes, was Prince Bram, 6 years old, the little one. His room nearest the guard's alcove and nearest, by the turret's turning, to the still room and the garden door. I sat with that a long time. I am not ashamed to say my hands shook. Not for myself. A guardsman learns early that his own fear is a thing to be set down in a corner and dealt with later, but for the size of what a 9-year-old had walked across a cold gallery to hand me, and for how nearly the whole careful house had talked itself into looking the other way. Somewhere quieter for your nerves, away from your brothers. I understood that phrase completely now, and the cold that came with understanding it was a different cold than the corridors. Someone had wanted Maelin moved out of the nursery wing, the watchful one, the one who would not sleep, the one who counted the counter, before the window they were mapping was ever used. She was not being threatened for her nerves. She was being removed because she was the last set of open eyes in that corridor, and a plan this patient does not tolerate an open eye. The question that remained, the only question that mattered now, was whose plan it was. Master Fenwick was a physician of the Queen Consort's household. The page who brought the false summons wore the Queen Consort's livery. The still-room door and the garden lane lay on the Queen Consort's side of the old house. All of it pointed one way. But a guardsman who accuses the Queen Consort of the realm on the strength of a ledger and an inference is a guardsman who will be crushed like a beetle underfoot. His ledger dismissed as a forgery, his story dismissed as ambition or madness, himself dismissed from the guard by nightfall. Unless he can lay the thing down in front of the one man in the house whom even a Queen Consort cannot dismiss, and lay it down so cleanly that it cannot be argued away. I needed the king. And to reach the king with something that would hold, I needed more than a ledger a clever physician would swear was a forged smear. I needed to catch the plan in the open. I needed, God help me, to let the window come and be standing in it when it did. But not alone. A man alone, even a guardsman, is a thing that can be made to disappear from the record, reassigned, discredited, gone. And if I was the only witness to what I meant to catch, then catching it would be worth nothing, because it would be my word against a Queen Consort's, and everyone knows how that arithmetic ends. I needed a second pair of eyes that the house could not wave away. And there was, in the whole house of Harrowgate, exactly one person of that weight who I judged would neither dismiss me nor betray me to the wrong ears. The king's own sister, the Princess Adela. You will not have heard of her the way you have heard of the great scheming figures of the court, because Princess Adela did not scheme. She worked. She was near 70, straight-backed, plain-spoken to the point of rudeness, and she had spent 50 years doing the unglamorous labor of the crown, the hospital visits, the regiment inspections, the endless dull committees, with a contempt for nonsense that had made her feared by every flatterer at court and trusted, quietly, by every honest servant in it. She had no patience for Morwenna, and never had. She had said so, to Morwenna's face, at a state dinner, in a sentence that was still repeated in the guardroom years later. If there was one royal in that house who would look at a ledger of a physician mapping the sleep of children and go cold and hard rather than comfortable and dismissive, it was Adela. And she rose before dawn, everyone knew it, to ride in the frost garden, while the rest of the house slept off its wine. So I did a thing that was well above my station and could have cost me my post on its own. I waited by the garden gate in the gray after my watch, ledger under my arm, and when the Princess Adela came out in her old riding coat with her breath smoking in the cold, I stepped into her path, and I stood at attention, and I said, "Your Highness, my name is Wrenn Halloway. I hold the nursery corridor, and I am about to tell you something that will sound like the ravings of a man who wants to be dismissed from the guard. I ask you to hear all of it before you decide which of us is mad." She looked at me the way she looked at everything, as though she were pricing it. Then she said, "Walk with me, guardsman, my horse can wait. Say your piece, and if it's nonsense I'll have you posted to the coast, and if it isn't, God help this house." And she turned and walked into the frost garden, and I fell in beside her, and I told her all of it, the barefoot girl in the too large shawl, the phrase that no 9-year-old invents, the false summons with the wrong seal, the man out of the still room counting sleeping children, the ledger that was a survey and not a record, the deepest sleeper being the smallest child, the window being mapped, the turret stair to the garden door not 30 feet from where we stood. I gave her the ledger. She read it as we walked, turning the pages with a gloved hand, and I watched her face, and I saw it do exactly what I had hoped and dreaded it would do. I saw the plain, dry, seen-everything face of a woman near 70 go, page by page, perfectly still and perfectly cold. She closed the ledger. She stood a moment looking at the small, forgotten garden door in the base of the turret, the one that led onto the carriage lane. Then she said, in a voice with no drama in it at all, which was somehow far worse than shouting, "My brother's grandchildren in their beds." She was quiet another moment. "You were right to come to me and not to your captain. Half the household office takes the Queen Consort's coin one way or another. I don't know which half, and neither do you. And a thing like this dies the instant it touches the wrong desk. So it doesn't touch a desk. It goes to the king from your mouth and mine together, with proof he cannot unsee." She fixed me with those pale gray Harrogate eyes, the same gray, I realized, as the child's. But a ledger is paper, and paper can be called a forgery, and a physician can be made to swear a guardsman planted it. "You know this." "I know it, Highness, which is why the ledger alone is not enough. We have to take them in the act. We have to let the window come." She did not flinch from it, and I loved her a little for that, the way you love anyone who does not flinch when the hard thing is named. "You mean to bait it," she said. "You mean to let them believe the corridor is theirs one more night and be waiting in it." A grim, thin thing that was not quite a smile touched her mouth. "Good. Then we bait it properly, and we do not risk one hair of those children doing it. Tell me exactly what you need." What I needed, and what we built over the next 2 days, quietly, telling no one, not the captain, not the steward, not the nannies, and above all not the children who could not be asked to act, was a trap that put no child in any danger at all, which was the first and last rule Adela and I agreed on and never once bent. The children would not be in the nursery on the night we let the window come. That was the whole architecture of it. On the chosen night, the 3 of them would be quietly moved, hours before, to the Princess Adela's own apartments on the far side of the house, under the guard of 2 men I trusted with my life from my old regiment whom Adela summoned on her personal warrant, so that no roster, no household office, no page in anyone's livery would know they had been moved. The nursery beds would be made to look slept in. The corridor would be left, to all appearances, exactly as it had been left a dozen times before, empty, unguarded, the guard sent away on a false summons, and the window would open, and the still-room door would click, and whoever came for a sleeping 6-year-old would come into a corridor that held no sleeping 6-year-old at all, only the king's sister, and the king himself, and me. Because that was the second thing Adela did, the thing I could never have done, and that turned the whole matter from a guardsman's wild story into an event no one could bury. She went to the king. Not with the ledger first, she was cannier than that. She went to her brother, and she told him plainly that she had reason to believe his grandchildren were in danger from inside his own house, that she would not name the source of it until he had seen it with his own eyes, and that she needed him, one night, to do something no king is ever asked to do, to hide in a dark room in his own palace and watch. King Alaric was old and grieving still under the surface, and had let the reins of the household slacken in a way that had let all of this grow in the dark. But he was not a fool, and he was not a coward, and when his sister of near 70 years, who had never in her life come to him with a hysteric's tale, stood in front of him white and cold and said, "Your grandchildren, Alaric, in their beds," he did not comfort her and send her away. He listened, and he agreed to watch. I will tell you now, because it matters, what nearly undid the whole plan the day before we sprang it, and how close the smooth gray lie came to winning after all. Because the people arranging that corridor were not stupid, and they had felt, however faintly, the shift Fenwick had reported his encounter with me. Of course he had. And though he had dressed it as a jumped-up guardsman being a nuisance about a locked door, someone above him had heard the words the nursery guard did not go and understood at once that the machine had a new part in it that did not turn the way the old parts turned. And so, the day before our night, they moved to remove the part. I was summoned, a real summons this time, my captain's true seal on it, to the household office, where Captain Denholm, looking uncomfortable, informed me that a complaint had been laid, that the new nursery guard, Halloway, had been behaving erratically, refusing lawful summonses, harassing the Queen Consort's physician, frightening the household with talk of intruders. And this was the clever stroke, the thing that turned my own actions into evidence against me, spending his off-duty hours whispering with the little Princess Maelin, who, as everyone knew, had lately been troubled with nervous fancies about strangers in the corridor. A guardsman feeding a disturbed child's delusions. Do you see how neatly it was built? Every true thing I had done, tilted half a degree, became proof that I was the danger. I was to be relieved of the nursery post at once, pending inquiry and reassigned to the South Range, effective the following evening, which was, of course, precisely our night. Remove Halloway from the corridor by nightfall tomorrow, and the corridor is empty and theirs again, and the ledger is a jealous man's forgery, and the little princess is a nervous child, and the window opens on schedule. It was, I have to grant, beautifully done. And it very nearly worked because it was lawful, and a guardsman obeys a lawful order, and Captain Denholm, who I do not believe was one of theirs, only a tired administrator glad to make a nuisance go away, signed it in perfect good faith. I stood in that office with the reassignment order in my hand, and I felt the whole thing slipping, felt myself about to become one more adult who had failed the girl in the shawl, and for one black moment I did not see the way through. Then I remembered that I was no longer alone, and I did the only thing left to do. I asked the captain, with all the respect I could muster, to hold the order 24 hours until noon the day after, on the personal request of Her Highness the Princess Adela, to whom he could send for confirmation. And Denholm, who feared Adela the way the whole house feared Adela, and who could not imagine what the king's own sister might want with a corridor guard but knew better than to cross her, sent, and Adela confirmed, and the order was held. 24 hours. It bought us exactly the one night we needed and not an hour more. If the window did not come that night, I would be gone the next noon, and the corridor would be theirs, and I would never get a second chance, because they would never again leave the still-room door for a man who might be watching. So it all came down, in the end, to a single night, as these things do, and to whether a plan 2 months in the patient-making would walk, one last time, into a corridor that its makers believed was finally, safely empty. There was one thing I had to do before the night came, and it was the hardest small thing of the whole affair, harder than facing Fenwick in the dark. I had to tell Maelin. Not the plan, I told her nothing of the plan, because a child cannot be asked to keep a secret that large under the eyes of the very people the secret is against, and because if she knew, her face would give it away, and a 9-year-old's fear is not a thing you can spend as though it were your own. But I owed her the truth of 2 things, and I found her in the frost garden the morning of our night, alone by the sundial where I had asked Nanny Cora to let her walk, and I knelt down to her height, which a guardsman is not supposed to do, so that we were eye to eye. You were right, I told her, about all of it. The man, the counting, the nights the guard is sent away. Every word you said was true, and I have proof of it now, and it is going to the king. I want you to hear that from me before anything else happens, because you have spent a long time being told you were wrong, and I need you to know, tonight and for the rest of your life, that you were right, and that being right when everyone tells you you're wrong is the bravest thing a person can be. Do you understand me? She looked at me very steadily. Is it going to be all right, she said. The little one's Bram. Not is it going to be all right for me, for Bram, the deepest sleeper, the smallest. She had never known that he was the one at the center of the survey. I would never tell her, but some animal part of a watchful sister had always turned first toward the littlest, and she turned that way now. They are going to be safe, I said, because you were brave enough to tell a stone in a corridor that you believed what you saw. Everything that keeps them safe tonight started with that. You did that, Maelin, not me, you. I only stood where you told me to stand. I straightened her collar the way she had straightened my crossbelt to make it real with my hands. Tonight I need you to do the last brave thing, which is the same as the first, nothing. You'll go where you're told, you'll ask no questions. You'll trust the soldier one more night. Can you do that? I can do nothing, she said, with the ghost of that grave humor, better than anyone in this house. And she put her small cold hand in my gloved one for a moment, and then she took it back and squared her shoulders, and I have carried the memory of that small squared pair of shoulders through every hard night of my life since. That evening, an hour after the children's supper, the three of them were quietly walked to a game. They were told. A special late game in their great-aunt Adela's rooms with hot chocolate and no bedtime, which delighted them and drew no notice, across the house and behind a locked door, under the guard of two of my old regiment, men with gray in their beards and no fear in them, who I would have trusted with the king himself. The nursery beds were shaped with bolsters and turned-down covers to look, by candlelight through a cracked door, like children asleep. And then, after the second bell, exactly as it had happened before, a soft-footed page in the Queen Consort's livery came up the turret stair with a folded paper sealed in the wrong wax, and told the nursery guard he was wanted at the south post. Only this time I took the paper and I read it, and I sighed the tired sigh of a beaten man, and I went. I let them see me go. That was the bait, and it was the whole of the bait. The watchers had to believe the troublesome guard had finally been broken to the summons like all the guards before him, that the corridor was empty and safe and theirs. I went down the turret stair, and around the first turning, out of sight of the page, and there I stopped, and I doubled back through the old servant's passage that Adela had shown me, and I came into the still room from below, through the forgotten garden door, into the dark under the corridor, where the king of the realm and his sister were already waiting in the black, seated on two plain chairs behind the still room's inner shelving, with a shuttered lantern between them and not a word between them. Two old people in the dark under a nursery, waiting to see what came for the children. I will never forget the king's face in the crack of lantern light. He had not spoken to me beyond a nod. Adela had told him only that he would see with his own eyes and must not, whatever came, make a sound until she gave the word, because the thing had to be let fully into the open, or it would be argued away forever. And he, a king, who had not been told to be silent by anyone in 40 years, sat in the dark in his own house and obeyed his sister and waited, and his face was the face of a man who has begun, in the last hour, to suspect the size of the thing that has been growing under his roof while he grieved and let the reins go slack, and who is bracing himself to see it. I stood against the wall in the deeper dark by the stair, where I could watch both the still room door above and the corridor beyond it through the shelving's gaps, and we waited. It did not take long. Perhaps half an hour after I had made my show of leaving, there was movement on the turret stair, not one set of feet, but two, and the still-room door at the top of the inner steps opened, and Master Fenwick came through it with his shielded candle, exactly as before. But he was not alone tonight, and that was the thing that turned a physician's crime into a house's reckoning, because the person who came through that door behind him, in a dark traveling cloak with the hood back, giving the low, quick orders of someone who has come to see a long work finished, was not a page or a hireling. It was Lord Cassius, the Queen Consort's grown son, come himself on the last clear night before the troublesome guard would be gone, to oversee the window he had spent 2 months' patience to open, because a thing this large, this final, a man does not trust to a physician alone at the end. He had come to make sure it was done right. I heard the king's breath change in the dark beside me. I did not look at him. I looked at Cassius and I listened, because everything now depended on letting them say it plainly, in their own mouths in front of the king, past any hope of calling it a forgery or a guardsman's spite. "The corridor's clear," Cassius said low. "The guard went." "He went," Fenwick murmured, "broke at last like the rest, and gone for good by tomorrow noon. The office confirmed it. This is the night. The window's better than an hour, with the guard summoned and no relief. It always is on the false summons. The little one's the deepest sleeper, nearest the stair. We take him down the turret and out the garden door to the lane, and the girl's the only one who'd have woken, and the girl, A dry, cold little sound, the girl's to be moved to the country for her nerves within the week regardless, poor troubled thing. So by the time anyone credits a word she says, it'll be long done, and a small prince who wandered from an unguarded nursery and was lost is a tragedy, not a crime. No one guarded him. No one will be able to say who. He started up the last steps toward the corridor. Bring the cloth and the... That, said the king of the realm, rising out of the dark, is enough. I have stood through a great many loud moments in my life, and I tell you that nothing in any of them was as loud as the silence that fell in that still room when King Alaric stood up out of the black behind the shelving, with the shuttered lantern lifting in his sister's hand to throw its light full on his face. Cassius froze on the steps with his candle in his hand. Fenwick made a small broken sound and dropped his. And the king came forward slowly into the light, an old man in a plain dark coat, and his face was not the slack, grieving, half-absent face I had stood behind for 9 years. It was the face of the man who had worn the crown before the grief took the edge off him, cold and terrible, and entirely awake. "Say it again," the king said very quietly to his wife's son. "The part about the little one, the deepest sleeper. Say it again to my face and not to your creature in the dark. My grandson Cassius, Bram, 6 years old, say it again." Cassius did not say it again. Cassius, who had been so patient and so careful for 2 months, did the thing that all of them do in the end when the corridor is not empty after all he reached, too late, for the story that makes it ordinary. "Your Majesty, this is not," the physician was checking the children, "there has been fever. I only came to..." And the king let him get exactly that far, that pitiful far, before he lifted one hand, and Cassius stopped, because even now, even caught, the habit of a lifetime made him stop when the king lifted his hand. "There is a ledger," the king said. "My sister has read it, and now so have I 2 months of it. Which child sleeps where and how deep, how long the corridor stands empty when the guard is sent away, which door opens onto the lane. It is written in your physician's hand, and you have just narrated it aloud to a man you thought was a candle in the dark, and I heard every word, and so did the king's sister, who is not a forgery and not a jealous guardsman and not a nervous child, and whom no one in this realm has ever once been able to call a liar." He turned his head, without turning his eyes off Cassius, and he said, into the dark by the stair, "Guardsman, come out." And I stepped out of the dark into the light, and I stood at attention in front of my king, and I said, "Your Majesty." "This is the man," Adela said, "who did not go when the summons came. 3 nights out of 7, for months, every guard on that post went when the false paper came, and the corridor stood empty, and this house came within a locked door of a horror it would never have recovered from. This one read the seal instead of the words, and stayed, and caught your physician counting your grandchildren in the dark, and brought it to me rather than to an office half of which eats out of your wife's hand. And then he built the trap you are standing in, and he built it so that not one child was within 100 yards of danger tonight, because he would not risk them even to catch the men who would. That is the guardsman, brother. Remember his name." The king looked at me for a long moment, and whatever was in that look I will not try to put fully into words, because a man does not cheapen the one time a king looked at him like that by making it into a pretty sentence. Then he turned back to Cassius and to the shaking physician, and he raised his voice for the first time, and it filled that low stone room like a bell. "The doors," he said. And the doors opened. Because Adela had arranged that too, my 2 old regiment men, having seen the children safe behind her locked apartments, had come quiet down through the servants' passage at the second bell and taken station at the top of the turret stair and at the garden door below, so that from the moment Cassius stepped into that still room, there had never been any way out of it that did not go through a king's soldier. They came in now, gray-bearded and grim, and they took Lord Cassius by the arms, and he did not fight them, because there is a kind of man who is all patience and cleverness in the dark and nothing at all in the light, and he had just discovered which kind he was. Fenwick they took as well, the ledger in his own hand being rope enough to hang his story. And the king stood in the middle of it, old and awake and terrible, and watched his wife's son led up out of the dark under his grandchildren's beds, and said not one word more to him, which was the worst thing he could have said. What came after in the weeks that followed, I saw only in pieces, because a guardsman is not admitted to the councils where the great reckonings are made. But the pieces were these: the ledger, and the king's own witness, and the king's sisters, could not be forged away or frightened away or bought away. And so for the first time in years, the machinery of the household turned against the Queen Consort's side of the house instead of for it. Lord Cassius did not answer for it in the ordinary courts. Great houses do not wash such linen in public, and there was the mercy of the children to think of, who need never know how near the dark had come, but he answered for it. He was stripped of every office and honor he held, and put out of the house of Harrowgate, and sent under escort to a cold estate on the northern coast from which he was not to travel, and the word among those who knew was that he would end his days there and be glad it was no worse. Master Fenwick, whose hand had written the survey, was broken from the physician's rolls and put where such men are put. And the Queen Consort. It was never proven in any document that Morwenna's own hand had drawn the plan. Cassius was her son, and a son may act to clear a path to a throne without his mother writing it down, and so she was not let out in irons, and the great fiction of the court held that she had known nothing. But everyone knew, and the king knew. And though it took longer, and belongs more to other tellings than to mine, the marriage that had let all of this grow in the dark did not survive what grew in it. The reins the old king had let go slack, he took up again, hard, that winter, and the woman who had told a 9-year-old girl that she would be moved somewhere quiet for her nerves found her own rooms grown quiet, and her own influence grown small, and in time she left the house of Harrowgate and did not return to it. The little princess never was sent to the country. She grew up in the nursery wing among her brothers, which was the whole of what she had ever asked for, and the man who came at night never came again. As for me, I was not reassigned to the South Range. The reassignment order that was to have taken effect at noon the day after our night was torn up by the king's own hand. I am told he asked to see it, and read it, and understood exactly what it had been for, and tore it into 4 pieces and dropped them on the floor of the household office in front of the men who had signed it, which was as clear a message about the running of his house as he ever needed to send. He offered me promotion. He offered me the captaincy of the very household guard, over Denholm's head, and I want to be honest and say that a poor man's heart leapt at it. But I asked him instead to let me keep the nursery corridor, and he looked at me a long moment, and then he laughed, which I had not heard him do in 9 years, and he said that a man who valued a cold night post above a captaincy was either a fool or the only sane man in the palace, and he could never tell which, and he gave me the post for as long as I wanted it. I wanted it a long time. I held that corridor for 11 more years. I stood the nights while the king's grandchildren grew up behind those 3 doors and stopped needing the guard the way small children need one, and started teasing me about my bearskin the way older children do, which is its own kind of honor. And every year on the anniversary of that gray morning in the gallery, without fail, Princess Maelin found her way to my post as a girl of 10 and 12 and a tall, serious young woman of 19, and she straightened the buckle of my crossbelt, which was never crooked, and she said the same 3 words she said the first time and every time after, which were not thank you, because we had gone past thank you long ago. She said, "You still stayed." And I said what I always said, which was, "I always will." People ask me when they hear the story what the lesson of it is, and they want me to say something grand about duty or discipline or the honor of the guard, and there is truth in all of that, and it is why they dressed me the way they dressed me and drilled me the way they drilled me. But it is not the lesson. The lesson is smaller and harder, and I have never found a way to make it sound as noble as it is. The whole house was full of good people. Nanny Cora loved those children. The tutor was kind. Even in his way, poor tired Captain Denholm meant no harm. And every one of them, when a small girl came to them with the truth in her hands, found a reason not to look, because looking was frightening and inconvenient and would have asked something of them, and it is so much easier to decide that a child is dreaming than to accept that the danger she names is real and now yours to face. She was not disbelieved by villains. She was disbelieved by decent people who did not want the trouble of believing her. That is how the dark almost won. Not through wickedness in the corridor, but through comfort in everyone who was told about the corridor and chose the comfortable answer. I was not braver than any of them. I want that understood. I did not want to look either. I wanted to be a statue because a statue is not responsible for anything. The only thing I did, the whole of what I did, was drop my eyes one gray morning and look at the child instead of over her head, and once I had looked I could not unlook, and everything else followed from that one small breaking of one small rule. She crossed a cold gallery in a shawl 3 sizes too big and tried one last door, and the door opened, and that was all it took, one grown person, in a house full of grown people, willing to believe what a child had seen. So when they ask me for the lesson, that is what I tell them, and it is the truest thing I know. When a child comes to you quiet and tired, having already been told no by everyone else, and asks you whether you are allowed to believe what you see, the answer is yes. You are allowed. You are more than allowed. And whether you say it or not is very likely the whole of everything, because somewhere down a dark corridor there is a door, and a small deep sleeper behind it, and the only thing between them and the night is one ordinary person deciding not to look away. I stayed. It is the only thing I was ever truly good at, and it turned out to be enough.